Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have an early impression video on a pretty expensive, I guess you would call this a niche house. It's actually from the house of Matriarch, and that's actually what it's called, the House of Matriarch. You can see I've got my House of Matriarch little cloth here to wipe the bottles down to make sure there's no fingerprints. I know the fingerprint police are patrolling. And it's a house that I have a lot of samples and I have a lot of discovery atomizers, but I actually have 0 bottles from. I've never taken the full plunge to buy a full bottle. And quite honestly, there's some reasons for that, one of which is price. But we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about the pros and cons. But first, I have to say that I've sort of amassed multiple samples of the fragrance we're going to discuss today. And the fragrance is now called Black No. 1, okay? It was originally called Blackbird. So when it first came out in 2012, it was called Blackbird. And I have both. I actually have the original Blackbird release, that looks like this. And here's Blackbird. This is what the older samples look like. And I have a newer sample that looks like this. This is what the newer samples look like from the House of Matriarch, Black No. 1. And then what ended up happening is I have to give a special shout out to my good friend Jonathan 1970. He sent me a decant of Blackbird. And so when this many samples of the same fragrance basically fall on my desk, I know I have to do a video and talk about it. So let's talk a little bit about the scent itself, what the brand says it is, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what I get from it. One thing I will tell you though before we start, this is an early impression video, even though I do think it's going to be relatively detailed because that's just how I do my videos. I've only given this a full wear today for the very first time. However, I have sprayed it before. I've worn it to bed a couple times, so I have sort of the idea of the scent in my head, but I'm no expert on the scent. I have not gone through a full bottle or anything like that, so just keep that in mind. So here is what the website from House of Matriarch says. A living work of liquid art. House of Matriarch's first cult classic was launched as Blackbird in 2012. Named the top men's fragrance by Men's Journal magazine and Best of the West by Sunset magazine, this worldly and penetrating perfume contains more than 300 exotic natural essences and a living spirit of its own. Black No. 1 has evolved in identity while retaining its essential magnificence. Only the name of this fragrance has changed. The formula is exactly the same, standing the test of time as it improves in the bottle. Comparison of the two available vintages draws the fragrance aficionados into Epicurean territory, illustrating the core philosophy of high perfumery, and that is their little slogan. Here's one of their Discovery Atomizer boxes. This one is for a limited edition bottle called The Longing, which I'll do a video on one day soon. There's not very much on YouTube about this. But that's their slogan, high perfumery. And she is all about sort of using natural essences, okay? So she claims that Blackbird is 97.5% natural. And I've said before, it's extremely hard to do a natural perfume well. 100% natural perfumery usually sucks because you need some of that synthetics to hold everything together. If you listen to Roja Dove explain it, he says that it's like having a shirt, that's 99% cotton, but maybe 1% spandex, and that 1% helps it stretch and stuff like that. It's a good analogy. Speaking of shirts, if you're wondering why I'm wearing my Dallas Stars jersey, it's actually playoff. It's NHL playoff season. It's game 3 against the Kraken tonight. And so I am a huge hockey fan. I think it's one of the last remaining sports that they have not destroyed, although they're trying to destroy it. They have not destroyed it yet. So playoff hockey is just awesome, awesome stuff. So let's talk about the scent itself and what I get from it and how I feel about the fragrance. So the first thing you'll notice when you first spray is that there is this very strong seaweed kelp-like smell. Kelp is basically a type of seaweed, and it almost smells like you're walking into an ocean area that's just sort of surrounded by seaweed. So you know how seaweed. You know how that what would you say, that that smell when you're just near the water sort of just hits your nose. Even if you're not in the water, sometimes if you're just near the water, that smell kind of hits your nose. I want you to keep in mind though, this is not an oceanic fragrance at all. It's just the only way I can describe what the kelp smells like to my nose when you first spray. And so you get this oceanic vibe. Well, I don't even want to say that because you don't get an oceanic vibe. That's not true. You get more of this saltiness. The saltiness from the greener aspects of the seaweed, from the greener aspects of the kelp, if you will, okay? And it gives off this green, almost meaty toughness, okay, in the opening. And it really feels like the two green notes sort of find each other, like, you know, like magnets. The two green notes just kind of find each other across the room. And the two green notes are this very medicinal cannabis-like smell, which one of my I have a couple cannabis fragrances that I've talked about recently, but probably my favorite is Kinski by Kinski. Kinski by Kinski is a very hard to find discontinued fragrance. It's madness though, and I absolutely love it, but that is one of my favorite cannabis notes in perfumery. This one, don't think you're going to smell like you just, you know, rolled up a J in the car or something with the windows up. You're not going to smell like that at all. You're not going to smell like you just lit up. You know, you're not going to have this marijuana smell in your clothes like you just smoked. Not at all. This is a completely different, more natural type of cannabis smell. And, but it does sort of blend with this kelp, with this seaweed-like smell. So it gives off this sort of earthy, somewhat skunky, woody type smell in the opening. That's very green. And I was expecting something a little different. When I saw the combination of cannabis and kelp, I was like, oh, I know what we're going to be in for. We're going to be in for an opening that's going to be something like this. This is one of my favorite Hugo Boss fragrances. Extremely underrated, by the way. This is called Boss Spirit. And Boss Spirit is long discontinued. For all you vintage hunters out there, you know, if you want to put something on your wish list that is a stunning fragrance from the past, oh, this is pure magic. I mean, Boss was on such a roll when they first launched their fragrance house. They had Boss number 1 in 1985. They had Boss Sport in 87, I believe. And then they had this in 1989. What a trio, a trifecta opening for the house of Hugo Boss for men. And they just knocked everyone out of the park. And I really think that even though Boss Bottled seemed like it was a, you know, blessing for them because it sold like hotcakes, I think it ended up being a curse because they stopped doing stuff like this and all they did was Boss Bottled flankers and stuff along those lines. But this is where it really shines, stuff like this. This is fantastic, but it opens up so green. It's almost like you took every green note in the world and blended it together, and it starts off very dark green. And I was expecting that with Blackbird. That's exactly what I was expecting. By the way, I have if I haven't said this before, I have sprayed all the different types. I've sprayed Blackbird. I've sprayed Black number 1, and initially I was thinking, you know what? I'm going to do a comparison video between these because I bet there's some differences. I can't pick any out. It smells almost identical, so don't worry about reformulation with this one. I think that one thing the House of Matriarch does is very good reformulations, if there had to be one. I think this literally is just a name change. To my nose, I don't detect any differences. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So I was expecting to almost be overwhelmed by this green opening. Instead, it sort of turns extremely smooth, okay? So imagine that sort of salty, meaty toughness of the seaweed mixing with the skunky, earthy woodiness of the cannabis and blending together to give this very smooth green opening with this woody profile. So look at the color of the green on my jersey. Imagine that. It's not like a super dark green. It's actually really smooth. And it just keeps everything even keel, okay, in the opening. And one of the things that you'll notice with that green combo is when it hits your nose at first, there's something a little bit weird. And I had to spray this a couple times today before it really hit me what that smell was. And the word that came to mind is the word stale. Okay, so there is this staleness to this scent. And it almost feels like there's a distorted sense of the fragrance that you're smelling. Like there's this distorted staleness, almost bordering on moldy, okay? That's a great way to describe sort of that opening weird combination with kelp and with kelp and cannabis, two green notes that you usually don't smell, right, in perfumery. You get a lot of things like, normally in perfume, you're going to get green things like galbanum or artemisia, you know, or basil or something like that. Very rarely are you going to smell a fragrance that has kelp and cannabis combined together to give this sort of profile. And so there's a strangeness to it, and I couldn't put my finger on exactly what my nose was smelling, and I ended up deciding on stale. There's almost like this stale aspect to the scent, bordering on moldy, which sound like words. You know, you take things like stale, moldy, meaty, toughness, the way I'm just describing it, and it might sound like I don't like this fragrance, but nothing could actually be further from the truth. I actually really like this fragrance. It's one of my favorite House of Matriarch fragrances, okay? And I like the House of Matriarch, but before we go any further, I feel like we should talk a little bit about price, because some reviewers don't talk about price at all. They say, well, you know, you should review price is subjective, maybe to some people. The price tag of this, which by the way for 100 mils is over $500. The price tag of this is subjective to some people. $500 is like buying a $5 McDonald's burger. And so you can't really use price as a good gauge of quality. And I understand what they're saying there, but I like to talk about price because it does factor into it for 99.9% of people. 99.9% of people are not in the camp where they can just go drop $560, which is what this is worth, by the way. It is right now on the House of Matriarch's website, 100 mils is $560. Big money, big money. I mean, we're talking Roja. We're talking Areej Dore. We're talking the very high-end, expensive perfumery brands, right? And so, at that price point, they should be competing with things like Areej Dore. You know, they should be competing against things like this, in my opinion. Especially with a product that has oud in it, which this does. Blackbird has oud in it, and we'll get to that later on. But they should be competing with things like Areej Dore. They should be competing against brands like this. They should be competing against brands like Ensar Oud. I actually paid hundreds less for this, okay, EO #1, than I did for what the House of Matriarch is asking. Hundreds less. And this is miles better, in my opinion. I would take Ensar EO #1 over Black #1 any day of the week. If you're going to go with the #1, this is the one that I would recommend. But the thing about it is that none of her frags really feel like they're worth the money, to be honest with you. I will tell you this, though. She does have a sale annually, I believe it is. Maybe it's semi-annually, but at least annually. She does this half-off sale on her website. And I think once you get to half off, you know, if you're closer to the 265, 250 to 300 area for 100 mils of Blackbird is much more palatable for me, okay? I think that's probably closer to what it's worth or what is fair. Probably 150 or 175 is really probably more like it. But you know, when you get half off, something like that does make a lot more sense. And the fact that she does these sales every year, every 6 months, I feel like she's kind of put herself in a little bit of a tough spot because people know the sale is coming. Why would they pay $560 when in a couple months they'll just be able to get it for half off, right? So they just wait for the half off sale, and that's probably where most of her bottles are sold. However, I will tell you this: if you compare this to some of the designer scents that are using ouds or things like that, this is still miles ahead of what you're going to get. So in the pecking order, you know, if you're just talking high level about quality for the House of Matriarch, I would put it above many of the designers that you're probably thinking of that use oud. You know, if you're comparing this to something like Dior's ouds, right? Oud Rosewood or Oud Ispahan, or if you compare this to the Tom Ford ouds or, you know, something like that. This is many rungs up the ladder above those type of brands when it comes to composition as far as I'm concerned. Now, there are some of those fragrances that I still love and I would wear them, and I love Tom Ford's tobacco oud and stuff like that. But as far as, you know, composition and value for money goes, I do think that this is a couple rungs higher on the ladder. However, when you compare it to things like this or things like this, right, you are still, I would say, many rungs below what you're getting from these type of artisanal niche houses, if you want to call them that. The Bortnikovs, the Areej Dores, and the Ensars. So if you're buying this because it's an oud fragrance, you will be disappointed, okay? We'll talk a little bit about the oud. I do think she's using real oud, and I do think it's a good quality oud. But for the oud heads out there, they'll be disappointed. If you're buying this, let's say, as a fragrance composition, and you want to get something that's a little better made, a little higher quality, I would say a little higher quality than some of the designers I talked about, I think you'll absolutely love this. But if you go in expecting to have an oud scent on par with some of these artisanal niche houses, you will be disappointed, just right off the bat, okay? So, to be quite honest, that little statement about what I just said about the House of Matriarch, how everything is, for me, it's, you know, these sort of discovery atomizers and you know, things like this, let's say the 10 ml discovery atomizers and stuff like that. This is where, that's about as far as I've gone with the House of Matriarch, because it's kind of how I feel about the brand. I just don't feel like the value for money is really there. And I like them all. Actually, I haven't smelled a bad Matriarch fragrance. I think they're all very well made. And the experience is, I've had great experience with everything from the brand, but there is something that just makes it feel like it's a couple rungs below these type of houses, you know. When you listen to people like Ensar talk, and you listen to him talk about creating a true work of art. Go watch his most recent transhumanism video that he put up within the last month or so. And he talks about, you know, the difference between being just a merchant and selling stuff for goods and to make money, and being a true artist. And with Areej Dore, Bortnikov, Ensar, those are the big three for me. And with the big three, I really do feel like you're getting that extra value for money. You're getting art in a bottle. Here, you're getting a great fragrance. You're getting a fantastic fragrance. But you're not getting true art in a bottle, and you're not getting the material qualities like you are with the Ensars and the Bortnikovs. That's my opinion, one man's opinion, okay? And you may, and like I said, I have 0 full bottles from the House of Bortnikov. None of them, I'm sorry, 0 full bottles from the House of Matriarch. None of them moved me enough to want to go buy a 50 or 100 ml bottle. They just didn't. I enjoy wearing them. I like having the samples or the discovery atomizers and stuff like that, but full bottles, I don't think I need. And so that's sort of how I feel about the brand in general. Now, saying all that, again, you may think it sounds like I don't like the fragrance. I do. I love this fragrance. It's actually one of my favorite House of Matriarch perfumes of all that I've smelled. And so one thing that she mentions, getting back to off of the soapbox rant as far as, you know, value for money goes, but just talking about the fragrance in general, she mentions there are 300 exotic natural essences, as she puts it, 300 exotic natural essences that go into Black number 1. I keep wanting to say Blackbird. It was known as Blackbird. One thing that she says that's interesting, though, is she goes into, there's actually a video on her website. If you go to her website, you know, Matriarch and House of Matriarch, and type in the Blackbird, Black number 1, and there's a video on there of her talking about the scent. And she's talking about how leather is this fantasy note, and how, you know, they need to use different ingredients and stuff to create that leather accord. But then while she's talking about it being a fantasy note, they're literally showing a beaker with a piece of black leather in there and what looks like someone's pouring like ethanol or something on it, like they're trying to distill the leather right into the beaker itself. And so on one hand, she's literally telling you there's no way to distill leather. On the other hand, they're showing a video of as if someone is actually doing that. And so you can kind of see the, I would say, target audience that they're going for. They're clearly going for people that want to take that next step, that want to go better quality than stuff that you're going to find at the mall. If you walk into a Macy's, you're inundated with stuff like Viktor and Rolf Spice Bomb, which is not a bad fragrance, but it's still, you know, it competes with the Dior Sauvages and the Bleu de Chanel's and the Versace Arrows and stuff like that. Those are the scents you're going to see right front and center. Polo Red, and I don't like any of that stuff. But that's what you're going to see at those malls. And so for those people that want to take the next step, she's trying to hold herself out as sort of this house that that literally can take that very next step. That's how she's trying to hold herself out as somebody that, you know, you're let's say you're a person that wants to do better than just going to the mall and buying a fragrance. Here I am, and I'm showing you the reasons why. But if anyone knows anything about perfume, they know you can't distill leather like that. So you know, it's the target audience she's going for. It's just an interesting sort of thing that I noticed in the video. Outside of that, all that being said, like I said, I like the scent. I think it's very well made. I've enjoyed wearing it today as my scent of the day. And a couple more details that I noticed. So a few of my favorite fragrances from the house, outside of Black No. 1, which is right up there with my favorites, is this. So I showed this earlier, but this is a 10 ml Discovery Atomizer of a fragrance called Beautywood. And Beautywood is actually a cedar-based fragrance. It's a fragrance that is structured, it came out in 2020 and it's structured around cedar blossom, cedar wood, and sandalwood, and rosewood. So there's a lot of different types of woods in here. But it's like a cedar, sandalwood, rosewood, and oud. And there's also that oud note in here. And again, it smells like there is real oud in here, but it's still a step down from the big boys like we talked about earlier. But I really do enjoy this fragrance. Like if someone said, hey, I'm looking for a really good take on, let's say, a cedar sandalwood combo with some rosewood, this is a great example of a well done woody scent. The other one that have mentioned on the channel before, but I don't talk about it very much. I need to do full reviews on these, but this is called Devotion. And Devotion, you can see it's almost like wispy incense. And this is an incense fragrance. And this is one of my favorite incense fragrances. It's very well done. It's a fragrance that I think deserves more love as far as like the best incense fragrances. I've talked about it on my Not a Top 10 Incense frankincense video that I did. But the way that she does woody notes and incense, I feel like is one of her strong suits. One of the House of Matriarch strong suits is the way that they do this woody incense. And it's actually a great segue into a few parts of the perfume that I wanted to highlight that are not listed on the note listing. So I guess I didn't even tell you guys a note listing, but according to Parfumo, the top is coniferous woods with white sage and kelp. The heart is amber, cannabis, and oud. The base is black leather, hyraceum, and ambergris, is what's listed on Parfumo for Black No. 1. And so one thing you'll notice that's not listed in the note listing, two main things, incense and pine, okay? Incense and pine are two big notes in this fragrance, according to my nose. And they are not listed in the note listing, but if you've ever burned incense cones, and interestingly enough, I actually have some House of Matriarch incense cones that were sent along to me whenever I made the purchases of the 10 ml decants. And if you've ever burned these before, they basically give off this sort of wispy, smoky incense feel. And if you know the way that the woody incense notes sort of combine, if you've smelled some of her work, it will, to me, it reminds me of another very famous, let's say, niche house, and that's Uncle Serge, Serge Lutens. If you've smelled some of his work, like if you've smelled stuff like this is Feminite du Bois, right? Christopher Sheldrake, Pierre Bourdon, and Serge Lutens were the perfumers. And this is fantastic stuff. They've mixed this with plum and a couple other things, but really the heart of it is the femininity of wood. And it focuses on that cedar note. And, you know, then later on, Serge Lutens put out this. This is Serge Noir, which he claims is his signature scent. And again, there's a fantastic, along with maybe a little bit of the spices that he does, very distinct, but the way that the woody notes are done by the house of Serge Lutens, to me, is very specific. And it's almost technical in nature. And there's a little bit of that same structure in the way that House of Matriarch does woody notes. So if you've smelled the Beautywood I mentioned earlier, it'll remind you a little bit of the way that Uncle Serge does woody notes. And I think it's very well done. I think that very few houses can pull off nowadays without smelling cheap. You know, because many of the new houses, I feel like they say, oh, you want a sandalwood? We'll just use some Javanol and some other stuff, and bam, you've got yourself this sandalwood accord. But they're all starting to smell very similar, and it's not the way that the House of Serge or the House of Matriarch does the woody notes. It's different, it's distinct, and I think it actually smells much cheaper. And so one of the biggest advantages for Black No. 1 for me is the way that the composition mixes these very different, you know, when you buy a fragrance for $560, you're really wanting something that's different. You don't want a retread. You don't want something that you've smelled a million times before. You want to smell something new and different and exciting and challenging and unique. And I feel like that's where some of these niche houses are coming off the rails. You know, you think about houses like Areej doing flankers, or, you know, putting out fragrances that smell designer-ish. And I feel like they've sort of lost their way, right? And they're not alone. There's a lot of niche houses that are doing it. And this fragrance, one of the biggest advantages is you have this interesting green opening, which obviously you guys have smelled green opening fragrances with ouds and woods and a little bit of animalics. But I doubt you've smelled a fragrance that has kelp and cannabis as sort of that green touch to the fragrance. And as it dries down into a structure that you'll smell more of that oud, and you'll smell more of the leather in the dry down. And you guys know leather is one of my favorite notes in perfumery. I love the note of leather. And here, the black leather is mixed with hyraceum that's the animalic note, to give it a little bit of this slight animalic touch, but nothing in this fragrance is too overly challenging. I really feel like somebody who is making that jump from, let's say, designer level fragrances to something a little bit more challenging could easily grab this, spray it, and be okay with it. They're not going to be so put off by it where it's like they got to go scrub the skin or anything like that to get the fragrance off. I don't think you're going to run into that at all. This is really one of those, this is a great, let's say, next step fragrance for someone that wants to get a higher quality oud, higher quality composition, smell something a little different that they've never smelled before, but do it in a way where you're not jumping right from the frying pan into the fire, right? You're kind of slowly turning up the heat. And this is a great fragrance for that. So I haven't spoken about maybe what many of you consider the most important part of this release, and that's the oud. And I've been sort of ignoring the oud because the oud is not a huge player in this. It works in the opening. You'll get a little bit of it, I think, to smooth everything off, to round everything out, to give off this, you know, in 2012, exotic vibe. Anything that had oud was considered an instant, you know, it was desired because oud was such a hot thing between 2007 and 2013 or 14. Anyone who was anyone had an oud fragrance, right? And so the oud in here, it smells real, if you will. It smells like the quality of the oud is a couple steps above what you would get in the designer realm, but it doesn't smell as high quality as stuff like this, of course. So like nowadays, I just did a video on the new Areej Dore the History of Oud collection. So I wore this one as my scent of the day on Friday. I actually wore it to work, the History of Cambodian Oud. And if you've smelled stuff like this is miles ahead, light years ahead of what you're going to get in something like the House of Matriarch. And so that's why I sort of avoided the whole oud issue in this fragrance so far, because it isn't barnyard. The main things you should know about it is that it's not barnyard and it's not super animalic. It's not super challenging. It's, you know, it's there. You can definitely detect it if you pay close attention, but it's not the star of the show. It's not the main focus of the show. It's part of that overall blend. And one thing that she mentions in her video, if you watch the video on her channel about the fragrance, she mentions that there isn't sort of a traditional pyramid for this scent. It's not like you have a true top, mid, and heart. Even though they list these notes here on Parfumo, she says it's more like an overall just giant blend of these 300 exotic essences. And I can see that, because while it continues to dry on your skin, you're going to notice these different elements, like I said. So in the top, for me, it's mostly about those green touches. As it continues to dry, you do get a little bit of this ambery, oudy, leathery, even the animalic note, even the hyrax note, which may very much put some people off, because hyrax is also known as African stone. And hyrax is almost like fossilized feces of this hyrax creature. I mean, it literally is fossilized, almost like mummified poop. And they use it very sparingly. It's a very tough ingredient for perfumers to use nowadays, because if they even use just a touch more than they should, it's going to put people off. It's a tough animalic ingredient to use. I actually have a top 5 hyrax fragrance video up on the channel. If you want to check that out, you can. But even the hyrax note is not super animalic. So this fragrance was made in a very classic House of Matriarch way. I've come to learn a little bit about the DNA from the House of Matriarch, if you will. And this is done in that classic House of Matriarch style. You get a very well-made, traditional, green, woody, and as it dries, you're going to pick up more and more of that incense. Again, think of the incense cones, and you're going to pick up more and more of this pine-like smell. So if I mentioned Serge Lutens earlier, but I'll just kind of do this on the fly here. If you've ever smelled something like this, this is, well, I guess I should have prepared. Where is it? Where are you? Here you are. This is Feminite, right? And this has like a pine-like incense. This is more, I would say, imagine put your hand in the tree and you get sap stuck on it, right? This is a little bit more sappy, and it feels like maybe the forest fire is a little bit further away in the background, whereas the incense here really comes to you. I'm a little shocked they didn't list the incense as a note in Black No. 1 or Blackbird, but this will get you sort of in the ballpark. Imagine you took some of the different Serge Lutens fragrances I mentioned, and you sort of blended them together, and you added this note of oud, and these strange notes of cannabis and kelp, and that's pretty much the fragrance. It doesn't change a whole lot. The green touches start to fade away as it continues, as the hours tick by, and you get more and more of the traditional woody DNA that the House of Matriarch is known for. I like it. I'm very lucky to get to try it. I'm very lucky to have these samples. I've enjoyed sort of spraying it and wearing it and all that good stuff. Would I go out and buy a bottle of this though? No, I don't think I would. I can appreciate it for what it is. I think it's one of my favorite from the House of Matriarch, but the house, to me, if I discovered this house 10 years ago, I probably would have bottles in my collection. But because I'm where I'm at now in my journey, this is one of those, I'm grateful to get to try it. These samples came to me. Someone, I think, sent me one of these. One of them came for free when I ordered my, my 2 Discovery atomizers whenever she was having her 50% off sale. And then Jonathan sent me this one. So these basically fell in my lap. So I'm lucky to get to try it. I feel blessed to get to do videos like this for you guys. But I don't think I'll be running out and buying a bottle anytime soon. But if you guys have experience with Black No. 1 or Blackbird, do leave a comment below. Let me know what your experience is with the House of Matriarch, if you agree or disagree with me. You know, one of the advantages of not doing this as my full-time job, since this is a hobby for me, is that I can do these type of videos where I know that, you know, these videos aren't going to get the clicks of the lists and the, you know, this is not a top 10 in the perfumers portfolio and all that stuff. Even the stream that I did on Russian Adam's new, the History of Oud collection has already gotten whatever it is, 1,200 views or something. And, you know, these videos are going to get 200, 300, 400 tops. No, not as many people are interested in listening to a review on a perfume anymore. They want bite-sized chunks, they want everything in lists, and they want to see a lot of different bottles and all that stuff, and I completely understand that, but I think it's still very important to do these individual reviews. So I can still do them because I don't have to focus on, you know, what the crowd tells me to do. I can still go my own way. This is a hobby for me. And I will say that it is an expensive hobby, so I did set up a coffee, which I'll leave the link in the description of the video if you want to give to the channel to help pay for some of these fragrances. You can buy me a coffee if that's your thing. If it's not, completely ignore it, and I'll continue pumping out content as much as I can. I love doing these videos for you guys. It is it's an honor and a privilege to get to, you know, have your trust and have you watch and interact with you guys. I still try and respond to every single comment that you leave. So I appreciate the support, everybody. Do like and subscribe and all that stuff. You know, that's what I'm supposed to say as a YouTuber. But if that's your thing, liking and subscribing, it does help the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm. It helps us get to more people. But I'll continue doing these videos no matter what happens, even if it reaches one person. I love the interaction. I love the back and forth. So thanks, everybody. Can't wait to see your comments down below. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.